about the data mining implementation process. Now we have understood till now what are the application of data mining, what is the purpose of data mining, and what is data mining. Now we have to now understand how can we implement this whole data mining process. Data mining, it is described as the process of finding hidden precious data by evaluating the huge quantity of information stored in the data warehouse using multiple data mining techniques like the artificial intelligence, like the machine learning and the statistics. That means behind all these data mining processes, since so much of information it is stored into the data warehouses, into various databases. So we need to use the various data mining techniques, and those can be run using the various artificial intelligence system, applying various machine learning algorithm, applying various kind of statistics. So if we want to implement this data mining process, now we are going to understand what are the steps required for the data mining implementation process. The first thing that we need is business understanding. That means we should understand if we are developing some data mining process for any particular business. We should understand each and everything about that business. So business understanding is a very first thing that is required when we want to implement our data mining technique. Second is data understanding. Data, it is the basic element which is required for the analysis, for implementing this data mining process. So we need to understand this data properly. We need to understand that if a person is clicking on some things, everything is serving as data, but not all the things that the user has clicked are important. Some of the things, they might be irrelevant. So we have to understand the data. What is important, what is required, what is not required. So that understanding of data, it is the second step of our data mining implementation process. Now, after understanding the data properly, we need to do data preparation. Data preparation is what? When we have received the data, we just cannot take the data and use it. We need to categorize our data. We need to make important changes into the data so that they can be applied properly to the implementation process. So preparation of this data has to be done. That is the third step here. After that, what do we need? We need to do the modeling. Different models have to be applied on this data for the purpose of analyzing this data properly. And using those modeling techniques, we can make the data prepared for the evaluation process. So evaluation, it is the next step into our data mining implementation process, where we are going to evaluate the data that we have received. After the whole evaluation process is done, we have evaluated our data properly. The next thing that we are going to do is deployment. Deployment means we will now implement this data mining technique that we have developed. We have to implement it. We have to make use of it for running our business. So basically, data mining implementation process, it involves 6 steps, beginning from business understanding, data understanding, data preparation, modeling, evaluation, and deployment. So this is a data mining implementation process. Now, understanding all these steps one by one, that if we talk about business understanding, what all steps are required? The tasks that are done in our business understanding. This first process here, the very first task that is required for business understanding is to determine the business objective. Since we are applying this data mining technique, we are implementing this data mining technique to any particular business. So we should understand first of all what are the objectives of this particular business. What does this business want? So the very first step here is to determine the business objective, the main aim of this business. Second is assess the situation. If we are developing any particular application of data mining for our business, we need to assess the situation of our business. That currently what is the situation? How can more improvements be done? What are the things that are lacking, which are not making sufficient profit? So we need to assess that whole situation of the business. Then after that, we need to determine the data mining goals. That using, if we are going to implement this data mining process, what should be our goal? We need to determine the data mining goal. That if we analyze this is data about the customer, what do we exactly want analyzing that data? So the next step is determination of the data mining goal. This is the next task which is required in business understanding. Now we have understood about business objective, we have assessed the situation current, and we have determined the data mining goal. Next thing would be to produce our project plan. If all these things are done, now we are going to implement the data mining technique. So in that case, what do we need to do? We need to produce a project plan. That what is going to be the whole plan for our project. If we are applying this data mining technique, so into the business, what should be our requirement? So that whole plan has to be produced. So that is the next task that is done in business understanding. So this is the very first step when we are implementing the data mining technique. Second is data understanding. Now we have to understand the data. What all tasks will be required for it? First of all, collecting the initial data. If a customer, he is buying some product, he is making some sort of transaction related to that product. So that will serve as an initial data. So we have to first of all understand the data. We need to collect all the data related to one particular customer. And this not only has to be done for one customer, this has to be done for all the customers that come to the store. So that will be the initial data. So collecting that initial data is the very first task of data understanding. Second, describing the data. Describing the data. Now, if we have collected all the data, we need to describe it. That describing the data means whether a customer, when he comes to a store, what does he buy more? He buys the clothing more, he buys the fruits more, he buys vegetables more, or he buys some other grocery items. We need to categorize, we need to describe the data. So that description is required. Then after that, we have to explore the data. Whatever data we have received related to our customer, we need to explore it properly. After that, we have to verify the data quality. That means there can be some data which is being produced using these processes which is not of enough quality, which is not producing any relevant result. So at that point of time, we need to verify it. Is this data required? If we collect this data, if we store this data, will it produce some effective results? So we need to verify the quality of data that we have taken. Not that keep on collecting all the data and that does not take us to any effective result. So we need to verify the quality of data. This is the next step for our data implementation process, which is called data understanding. So the first step was business understanding and the second step here is data understanding. Now, our next step is data preparation. Now we have to prepare our data properly. The data whose understanding has been done, that means whose collection has been done, which has already been verified. Now we have to prepare that data so that it can be given for modeling. Preparing the data, it also requires number of things. First of all, select the data. That means if we have so much of data, we have if we talk about the internet nowadays, all the time so much of data is flowing. So we cannot just take all the data and store into our databases. We have to select the data. out of which we can gain something important. So that selection of data is required, which is done in this process of data preparation. Now, once the data is selected, which we want to analyze, we have to clean the data. Clean the data means with this data, it is going through these intelligent systems. That means they are going over the network, they are being passed from one system to another. So a lot of noise come into that data. So we need to remove that noise. We need to clean our data. So that is the next step which is required in the data preparation. After that, we need to construct the data. Construct the data means we need to perform proper structuring of that data. That means structuring of data, it can be done into two different clusters. That means one thing can be related on one side, one cluster can be related on another side. So we might cluster the data, or we might form some hierarchy of the data, that this data will aggregate into this particular thing, this data can aggregate into this particular thing. So we need to form a proper structuring of our data. So that structuring process, it comes under construction of data. After that, what is required? Integrate the data. Integrate the data means we have to integrate the data together. We need to integrate their data into a single whole so that it can be utilized, it can be modeled properly. After that, formatting of data should be done. And once the formatting is done, our data is ready to enter the next step of data mining implementation process, which is modeling. Now, we have to, whatever data has been received during this time, now we have to model it properly. So the various tasks that are required for modeling are, first of all, selecting the modeling technique. There are number of modeling techniques available. Now we have to select a particular modeling technique as per the requirement of the business. That what do we want to take out from this data? So according to that, we need to take we need to find a proper modeling technique for it. That is the very first thing is in this modeling. Next would be generating a test design. So once modeling is done, we need to generate the test design. We need to make proper test designing of that model. Once the design has been created, that means we have designed, we have analyzed that if we apply this particular model, what all process should be indulged into that, what should be the input, what should be the output, the whole designing has to be done. It has to be generated. So this is the second step. Now the third step is to build the model. Once the designing of model has been done, the test design has been generated, we need to build our model for that particular data. So this is the next step, to build the model. And the last step in this modeling would be to assess the model. Assess the model is not that once the model has been created for our data, we can just let it run like this. No, we need to assess the model. That means, is that particular model that we have selected, that we are using, is it producing us the correct result? We need to assess the situation, that if we raise this input, the output being produced by this model, are they all correct? So we need to assessing of our model, and this is not just one time process. This has to be continuously done, because every time new data will generate up. So not that once the assessing is done, our work is done. We need to keep on doing this assessing process on this model, so that our model that we have generated, that we are using in data mining, it keeps on producing the correct result. If we somehow find that this assessing of model, this is not working in an appropriate way, we might have to change our modeling technique. We might have to redesign that whole model. So that has to be done. So that is why we require to assess the model time to time. Now, the fifth step that would be there in the data mining implementation process, it would be evaluation. Now, once the data has been taken, the data has been cleaned, the data has been understood, and the model has been implemented for the data. Now we have to do the evaluation. We have to evaluate the results, correct or not. Are they producing what we require? If we are collecting data about any particular customer, are we understanding his requirements correctly? When the next time, if we are implementing this technique, when the next time the customer comes for our purchases, is he satisfied with whatever we have supplied him? So we need to evaluate those results. That has to be done in this evaluation process. Then the review process, this whole thing has to be reviewed by various analysts, by various developers. And after this, we need to determine the next step. That after this, the evaluation is done. That means we have implemented our data mining process. Now, what would be the next step for us? And the last and the final step for this data mining implementation technique is deployment. Deployment is to now execute this whole process into action. Now we have to implement this data mining process. So that will require, we can not just take it and implement it. We need to plan this development process. This deployment process, if we want to deploy our data mining process, we need to plan it properly. So that is a very first process. Next would be plan, monitoring and maintenance. Once we think of implementing that particular process, now monitoring of that is required. Maintenance of that is required. So that is the next step that happens in this deployment process. After this, when the implementation is done, we need to produce a final report. Final report will produce us that this particular data has been taken, this way this has been cleared, this way this has been understood, then the modeling has been done, and whatever results we are getting, the report of those results have to be produced. So that is the next step that we do in this deployment process. We produce the final report. And this final report, this will be analyzed by various developers who are working on this data mining implementation process. After this is being done, we will review the project. Our process, our project that we have implemented, it will be reviewed whether it is working in the correct way or not. So these are the 6 steps which are required for the data mining implementation process. When we think of implementing this, these are the 6 steps which are to be done. Now, let us discuss the data mining architecture. Now, we are talking about this data mining. So first of all, the basic thing from where we can access our data, that can be the World Wide Web. Like I have been telling that on this World Wide Web, using our internet, we are producing so much and so much of the data. So this data, it can be retrieved from the World Wide Web. Then there can be other data sources, like the databases can be there, where the data related to our customers who come to buy something from our organization, from our businesses, the data has to be stored. So we can retrieve that data from the various databases. From the data warehouse, which is the huge repository of data, where too much of data can be stored. Metadata can be stored. Raw data can be there. Summarized data can be there. So all forms of data we can take from the data warehouse. Other than this, there can be other data repositories, like there can be various spreadsheets, various simple XML files, various flat files. So these are various other data repositories from where the data can be taken. So the basic thing that we want is, in this data mining architecture, if we think about building this data mining architecture, the very first thing is to retrieve the data. The retrieval of data, it can be done from the World Wide Web, from various databases, from the data warehouse, or from other data repositories. Now, we have collected the data. Next thing would be data cleaning, data integration and data selection. Now, whatever data we have taken, it has to be cleaned. Data cleaning, it is a very important step. Why is it important? Because we cannot just take all the data. We need to clean our data, that what is relevant and what is irrelevant. We need to do the cleaning of our data. Then we need to integrate our data. We need to make different sets of the data so that they can be utilized properly. And we need to do the selection of data, whether we should take this data or this is not required. The selection of data has to be done. So for this data mining architecture, if we want to build some kind of data mining technique, our step will be data cleaning, data integration and data selection. After this, what is required? We require a database or the data warehouse server. So these database or data warehouse server will help us in performing all these activities of data cleaning, data integration and data selection. So these server, whether it is a database server or the data warehouse server, it will help us to perform all these activities on the data. Now comes our data mining engine. So data mining engine, this will perform the whole set of activities that we have discussed. Data mining engine, it will do the business understanding, it will do the data understanding, it will help us selecting the data, it will help us do the employment of data. So all these techniques has to be, all these processes, these have to be done by the data mining engine. After this data mining engine, this requires the support of the knowledge base. On the basis of certain knowledge only, these data mining engine, they can perform all the operation properly. So on one end, we have the knowledge base, which help us in doing all these processing. Then we have above that the pattern evaluation. We need to evaluate the pattern of the customer. Pattern is what? The sequence of activities that a person performs. Like if I talk about a particular person, there is a particular set of interests that person has. He has certain pattern. Like if we talk about movies, what sort of movies does he like? Whether he likes comedy movies, he likes action movies, he likes thriller movies, what sort of movies he likes, or which actors he likes the most, which directors he likes the most, or whose movie he watches regularly. So we need to understand this pattern. We need to evaluate that pattern. And once we get to understand the pattern of the customer, it will become so easy for us to recommend the related things to the customer. If we understand that what pattern our customer follows, so we can evaluate that particular pattern. So pattern evaluation means understanding the sequence of actions that a particular person performs. So in our data also, when we are talking about data mining engine, some data is produced. So we need to evaluate patterns into our data, that if we are talking about any particular customer, what pattern does he follow? We need to understand those patterns. And once we understand those patterns, same things can be recommended to him. And this again will require the help of knowledge base. And these patterns, once evaluated, they have to be stored back onto the knowledge base too. Knowledge base, it will again be a repository of data where all the knowledge that we extract from our data mining engine by evaluating these patterns, it has to be stored. The last thing that is required for the data mining is graphical user interface, GUI. That means this graphical user interface, it will allow the user to access all these patterns, all these data mining engines. Using certain interface only, we can access whatever we have produced. So that is a graphical user interface. Interface which is graphical so that it can be easily understandable. It can be easily understood. So that is why we need to provide a graphical user interface to the end user. Like you see, we nowadays, if we just talk about our mobile, we have everything in the form of graphics. We have icons of everything. We have the icon of YouTube, we have the icon of Netflix. All the things are in the form of images, in the form of graphics. We do not have to read out everything. They are not in the form of text. They are in the form of graphics. So if they are in the form of graphics, recognition of images or the graphics, it is very easy for a person. If we write down the word lion, Lion, or we put the image of lion, this image of lion, this will be fed into the mind of user very easily. So this image or this graphic, they have more impact on any person. They will be understood by the person in a better way. So that is why we need to provide a graphical user interface to the end user who can retrieve the data from this data mining processes. So the data mining architecture that we have talked about, at the bottom we have the various repositories of data, which can be the World Wide Web, which can be the database, which can be the data warehouse or any other data repository. After that, we perform the work of data cleaning, integration and selection. We require database or the data warehouse server. And next, we will require the data mining engine. After that, it will be the task of pattern evaluation. And then it will be graphical user interface. Graphical user interface, it will be required so that end user can view whatever has been produced using this architecture. And on the other side, we have the knowledge base. The knowledge, whatever knowledge we have gained from this data mining architecture, this knowledge can be utilized, can be taken out in a proper way and used for making strategic decisions for the businesses.